Day 2. Just gonna double check something here real quick. All right, good. We are live and it is looking pretty good. All right. And everyone is left all of a sudden. All right, we ready?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I'll wait. Yeah, don't worry.
Okay, cool. So, Blender, day 2. Hugh here has used, you've both used Premiere, right?
Yes.
Okay, so don't need to spend too long in dependency management, but just like Premiere, Blender keeps its dependencies separate. So we've got our main blend file, and then we've got different textures and stuff like that, mostly textures. And if you don't keep your dependencies together, this happens. You end up with missing textures, and it looks awful. So the way to not have that happen is to create a project folder, just like in Premiere. So we've got, this is what a typical project folder for me looks like. We've got our, first of all, we've got our textures, well, we've got the blend file out here. Then we've got our textures, that file. And then we've got an assets folder for other downloaded assets from the internet. And then I like to keep a renders folder as well to put various renders I've made in. And that's basically how a project folder works. So how about we go ahead and everyone create project folders for your projects. That.
I'm just going to copy.
So close out of Blender first, because if you move your blend file while Blender's open, it's going to get confused.
Control S.
So yeah, this is more of a housekeeping issue than anything. All right, we good to go? All right, so looks like you're still finishing that up. All right, great. So now let's get back to the actual content of what we're doing today. Adding texture. So far we have just had basically made a whole bunch of white blobs. So how do we take those white blobs and actually turn them into something that looks like something that exists in the world? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and select your object. And it's probably best right now if you actually make a new file just to test this out on.
Before we put it on our good thing.
Yeah. So go ahead and select your cube. And then right here in the Properties panel, we're going to come down to the second to bottom tab where it says Material Properties. As you can see, our cube, now we get a whole bunch of controls of what we can make this look like. And there's a whole bunch of dialogues, and it looks kind of scary. I promise you there's only 3, maybe 4 that we're actually going to have to worry about. So let's first talk about the base color. So you click on this big white thing, and now you get a nice little color picker that you can change your color with. But you'll notice that the color's not actually changing when you try to change it. And the reason for this is because right now we're in the object view. So we have covered our wireframe mode, and we've covered our object mode, our viewport shading mode. But we have to go into material view to actually see the color change. And the material view is a lot more expensive to use on your machine. It's going to make it run slower, depending on the complexity of your materials. But you'll actually be able to see the materials as they will look, or an approximation of how they will look in the final render. So go around and I guess play around with that color dialog, get used to it. We've got 3 tabs. We've got our RGB, so it allows you to set it in RGB space. The default's hue, saturation, value, so you can easily adjust the hue, the saturation, the value as individual codes. And then you can also paste in a hex code if you have that from somewhere else.
And that's a specific color.
Yeah, so you could use the eyedropper in Photoshop, for instance, to get a hex code of something, and then you can paste it into there.
That's cool.
Everyone good with that? All right. Let's move on to a little bit of theory. So, these are why, oh, I need to switch back to my presentation. Whoopee. These are 2 instances of the same model, right? These are the same model with the same base color texture. But one of them looks significantly better than the other one. Can any of you tell me why?
Texture.
Well, yeah, but any more detail as to what in one of these makes it look better than the other?
Lighting, texture, shading, all that jazz.
Exactly. And so far we've only figured out how to actually change the color of our object. But what if we want to do other things with it? So this is where PBR materials come in. Now, there's many different shading models, and there's many different ways that you can determine how a material interacts with light. PBR, or physically based rendering, is the one we're going to cover today, and it is the most commonplace in today's age. And with PBR textures, you can represent basically any 3D object in a scene. So obviously, light is very complex in the way it works. And anything we do here is an approximation of how light works. But PBR is a very physically based approximation, and it was made not just by artists wanting to say, oh, I'm going to make this look this way, but by physicians, or physicists, not physicians, who know how light works and were able to figure out a nice way to approximate it. Therefore, it is very mathematically intense, and if you Google it, you might find something like this. Big, scary. We don't need to worry about any of that. We just need to worry about our, let's say, 3 basic channels which we're going to manipulate to make our image look the way we want it to. So take a look at this photo I took this morning, right? And let's take a look at the asphalt and the car. Both are relatively dark in the frame. They have, I'd say, a dark gray color, but they look very different. Why is that?
Shininess, reflection.
Exactly. So the first thing we're going to cover is shininess, or actually, as it's determined in PBR, roughness. So it's actually done in the inverse. The lower your roughness value is, the shinier your material, and the higher your roughness value is, the more matte your material is. So go ahead and you can play with this now. Select the roughness slider that I have highlighted up here, and go ahead and slide that around and see what happens. Yeah, the reflections, that's just a default image that it uses because you've got an empty scene. If it didn't use a default image, it would just be blank. You wouldn't be able to tell what it's reflecting. But yeah, if we adjust the roughness, we can see that it becomes more and less reflective. And it's more than just that. If we look back at this cube here, you'll notice that at the beginning we have a very bright specular reflection of the sun. But as we get more and more bright, not only does it get wider, does our halo get bigger, it gets dimmer as well. And that's due to conservation of energy, which PBR has actually built in. Because if you have only a certain amount of light hitting the object, it can all come out together as a really bright specular highlight, or it can spread out and come out as as dimmer, but across the whole object. And that's here's kind of a diagram of how that works. We can see the green light is what's going into the reflection, and it just bounces right off. But some of the other light bounces around inside, and then it comes out, and that's what goes into the diffuse part, the red. And our roughness value determines how much of that light actually diffuses and how much of it is going to diffuse. Because no surfaces in the real world are perfectly flat. Even if something looks flat, it's actually very rough, and that's what creates that diffusion. That's why you can actually see things if there's not a light bouncing directly off of it. So that's what we model. We model the micro roughness within the surface that determines how shiny or rough it's going to be. Next, I want you to take a look at this image. And here, this is going to be a little bit more difficult. We've got two very shiny surfaces. We've got this painted part of the car, and then we've got this bumper here. What's the difference between those two, objectively speaking?
Reflection?
Well, yes, reflection, but what specifically about the reflection?
The color that it's bouncing back. Like the chrome is showing exactly the color, the same exact color, whereas the other one is like gray tint.
Very good. So this is the second property, or I guess the third property if you're going to count the color, that goes into PBR shading, which is the metalness. And metalness is a little bit more hard to define than roughness. But basically, when it comes to physics, there's two types of materials. There's dielectric materials and there's conductive materials. And these materials behave differently when light hits them. So we've got another slider here called metallic, or metalness as it's referred to in some other programs. If it's 0, we get what looks almost like a paint job over a plastic. Meanwhile, if it's 1, we get a nice gold reflection. And metallic reflections will actually tint the reflection if the thing is tinted, whereas diffuse will not. So it's a lot harder to objectively say what metallic is doing, but you can see what it does, right? And also goes to show that people who decide to call gold a color are full of crap, because you can't actually represent gold without changing the metallic value. No matter what you did to the base color, you would not get this nice shiny gold. And these two actually have the exact same base color. So go ahead and play around with the metalness slider. Now, I will say that in real life, technically, you can only have a value of 0 or a value of 1 for your metalness. The reason the program allows you to do a gradient is because sometimes maybe you're modeling a piece of chrome that has a light layer of dust over it. Well, the chrome is going to be metal, but the dust is not going to be, and the only way to do that is by setting the metalness to something like 90%. Though that's not physically accurate to what would be happening. So basically, when you have a base material, you should either be having it be metallic or not metallic. And then your in-between states should only come out of your texture layering when you're trying to layer a layer of dust over it or something like that. And that's a little bit beyond the scope of this class. But that's why you'll get textures that sometimes aren't fully metallic, because they're approximating what would happen if, say, there was dirt on top of your metal material. So I guess I'll move on to the next slide. With this combination of roughness and metallic, you can get basically any type of material that doesn't involve transparency or translucency or subsurface scattering. So go ahead and play around with that for a little bit. And let's reconvene at, I don't know, 5:33.
I just love how it looks. It's so cool.
Yep.
What am I, well, this isn't even what I'm supposed to be doing. Wondering why it doesn't come out.
So when you extrude things, it extrudes all together, and here's why. Here, can I undo for a second?
Sure.
So basically, if I were to say select these, I could extrude them as a whole. So that's why it does that. If you want it to extrude individual, set this to extrude individual instead. And now it's going to do that.
Okay, cool. So it's different ones.
Yeah, it's like Photoshop. It has different tools. I didn't go over them just because they're a little complex, but
Yeah. I'm playing more with the subsurface IQR. And I should use edit mode if I'm doing any of this.
no.
Oh, okay.
The material is separate from the mesh. Edit mode, you're only editing the mesh, the physical like structure of it. I think that subsurface is incompatible with metallic, so
So that's not even going to do anything.
yeah.
Just seeing what I'll be
It actually might be incompatible with EV in general. Some of those don't work in material preview mode.
I just like the way it looks.
Yeah. All right, are we ready to move on?
Sure thing.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so just, I guess, get a look at this graphic I put on the screen. of all the different roughness values and metallic values. So, now, let's go ahead and open up our projects again. And let's get started with making these walls actually look like walls and not blobs of white. So, I've gone ahead and provided some, let's go ahead actually, let's start by, here, let me open up my project. Quick note on Windows. Hello, Jabril. So you missed my whole spiel about materials. Are you familiar at all with how PBR materials work?
How, what?
PBR materials work.
No, but does it cover up the vertices?
No, materials are essentially how you make it the color and stuff like that. So basically I've got this little graph here. Everything to the left has a lower roughness value. Everything to the right has a higher roughness value. Everything above is set to metal. Everything below is set to dielectric. So let me go ahead and swap over to my Blender view. So let me go ahead and set up a material for these walls, and I'll show you how I did this as well. So down here, I hit the material properties, click that. And it looks like the walls didn't actually get a material by default. That's fine. So make sure our walls are selected, then we're going to click New. Now this might, apparently on my computer, lag a little bit. That's fine. I'm going to wait for you to catch up with creating a new material. And of course we have to be in preview view to actually see that get changed. So our material preview is down here. So click that and then click New. So now you can change the base color by changing, here, let me go into material mode. Just gonna take a little while to do on my computer because, so I can go into material mode, start changing the base color, and then I can change the roughness with this slider down here. And I can change the metalness with this slider here. All right, so let's go ahead and start adding image textures because you'll notice that it's kind of hard, and FYI, metalness can only be 1 or 0. That's the only thing that's physically accurate. Let's go ahead and start adding image textures because making something just a solid color is not going to be interesting, right? So we're going to go ahead to the top menu here and click on Shading. So this is going to open the shading workspace. And have any of you worked with node editors before? Like I know DaVinci Resolve uses nodes.
I know After Effects has it.
After Effects doesn't use nodes to my
Well, then I
knowledge. So, okay, let me try to explain the concept of nodes real quick. This is a node. It's a quite big node. The principled node's actually the biggest node that there is. The node has multiple inputs. As you can see, these represent all the values that we've just been playing around with. But you'll notice that they've also got little dongles at the end here, meaning you can attach them to other things. So I can do Shift-A again, and we've got a whole bunch of different node types we can add. So let me just add a value node, and this is the simplest node there is. All it does is it takes a singular value, a float value, a numerical value that can be a fraction, and it outputs it. So I could plug this value into, say, my roughness channel, which is down here, and now the roughness is being controlled by this node. It's basically, this node is outputting it through that gray socket, and it's going into the roughness channel of this node. And this node is doing all the magic to do the actual rendering, and then it's putting it onto the material. So now we can change our roughness externally, right? But here's the thing. It doesn't just have to be a scalar value. Each one of these sockets can actually output a different value per pixel. So you could put a texture into this socket, and then the roughness would change depending on where on the model you're looking at. So let's go ahead and start just by adding an RGB node. So Shift-A, input, RGB. Let me turn on screencast keys real quick so that you can see what I'm doing. Where is this? Why is this not working? Oh, okay, I do have screencast keys working. Okay, great. And let's take our color output, and color outputs are yellow, and plug that into our base color. So now our base color is being controlled by this node. But color is probably the most boring node we could put here, because you can also put textures or images here. And instead of just seeing a single color, you'll see the image on it. Is this making sense? All right, so let's go ahead and Shift-A. Oh, actually, before we do that, you need to get the images to put in. So I have gone ahead and assembled a few textures to use. So go ahead and you can download them from that URL there. I'm going to leave that up for a second. And download the folder that says Backrooms Texture 1. It's tinyurl.com/backroomstextures. And I'll go ahead and do that here as well. So I'm gonna go to tinyurl.com/backroomstextures. Right? And I'm going to go ahead and download backroomswall1.zip. And let's just save it to the downloads folder for now. So does everyone have it in their downloads folder?
Yeah.
Great. So now we're going to unzip this. But, and depending on what operating system you're working on, it's going to look a little different for you. But we don't just want to... Crap, I just realized I never created a project folder myself. Let me do that. Let's put that in here. There we go. So we don't want to just import them directly into Blender from our downloads folder, because again, the dependencies issue. So in our project folder, let's go ahead, and you already have a textures folder. So I'm going to make one, textures, and let's take this Backrooms Wall 1 folder and just put it in there, within the textures folder of your project folder. It is tinyurl.com/backroomstextures. Without the, no, you can't have spaces, so.
Thank you.
And then we didn't go over setting up a project folder with you, right? But you've used Premiere, right?
Yeah.
So set up a project folder for your blend file like you would for a Premiere file. If you're looking for save as, it's there. All right, let me know when we're ready to move on. I should probably take this.
Oh, you got it. Here, you want the... This might be confusing if you take those.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. All right, we ready?
Yes.
Do you have the project folder working? What? How did you end up with Wondershare Media Encoder opening?
I have no idea. Let's just open one I've got here. Is there any way to just drag it in here?
No, just close out of Blender and then move your blend file into the project folder.
But
Just drag and drop it into the project folder from Finder. So go ahead and,
this is just...
no, that's the textures. You weren't here when we went over making a project folder, but just make a new folder. Call it the name of your project. And then go ahead and take your blend file and put it in there. Now open up the folder and let's get Wondershare closed. That's going to hog system resources. God, with that 2 seconds, it's made me not want to recommend it to friends and colleagues.
Wondershare?
Yeah, it opened on its own and then complained about, and then immediately started trying to advertise a higher tier version when we tried to close it. And then we tried to close it again, and it started asking for like a survey.
It didn't used to be that way. It used to be good.
So go ahead and make a textures folder and put those 2 folders in there. Great. So now you can open up the blend file again. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and go back into our shading workspace. Make sure you open up the version of the blend file that's in the project folder.
So these different workspaces are kind of like in Premiere, you can have different...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can reconfigure them. So like if I wanted to add another window up here, or let me not do that. If I wanted to add another window up here, I could drag out from there. It's not really important for what we're doing right now. So let me go ahead and make a material for this myself. So now let's go ahead and Shift A. You got that saved? All right, Shift A. And we're going to go under Texture and look for an image texture. And go ahead and connect that into the color value of your principled node.
Base color?
Yeah, base color.
So we can have multiple things in there. Oh no, it's the way the color.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can only have one thing connected at a time. And then let's go ahead and hit open. And then let's navigate into our textures folder and find backroom wall 1 base color. Backrooms wall 1 base color. That's going to be within our textures folder. Backrooms wall 1 base color. Did you import the texture into the project folder?
It should be in there.
Oh, you put the zip file in there. You didn't unzip the zip file.
Bad David. Okay.
So you got to unzip the zip file.
Here, I'm just going to put this in here.
That works too, yeah. I generally try to keep texture sets together in folders, but you don't have to. It just reduces clutter within the textures folder to do that. So you'll no doubt have noticed, while David still finishes that up, but he can see it up here, that this doesn't look right. And you haven't done anything wrong, don't worry, we're just missing a crucial step. And that is UV mapping, the bane of every artist's existence. You want your base color file.
Base color.
Yeah. UV mapping. So, what is UV mapping? In order to have a texture applied to it, every object in 3D must be unwrapped onto a two-dimensional plane, essentially. And what that does is it basically tells the program what part of the texture is going to be applied to what part of the model. So I've been showing that speaker texture a lot today. And if I go ahead and view the UV map of that, this is what that looks like. So we've got our speaker, right? And then here we've got the two-dimensional texture sheet of that speaker and all the sides of it laid out in 2D space so that we can have our texture that I made in Substance Painter properly applied to the speaker when we render, right? So a UV map is just a mapping of every vertex on the model and its corresponding point on a two-dimensional texture. And that's why we went to great lengths to make sure our topology looked good, because with bad topology, getting a UV map that's going to work is going to be next to impossible. So, how do we make a UV map? Well, it's a process called UV unwrapping. And UV unwrapping is essentially the process of taking a 3D model, cutting up all the seams in it, and making it do this. Where you're basically figuring out, okay, if my model is a box, how do we flatten this box in a way that's not going to have two faces overlapping? So let's get started in doing that. So let's go ahead and add a new cube to the scene, just so we can practice UV mapping on it. And let's go back into the default view. We don't need to stay in the shader editor. And click off of for now, I would click back into solid rendering mode up here so that we can see what we're doing a little bit better. Oh, and by the way, I just got an add-on that shows all my key presses on the screen, so if you're ever confused about what I'm doing, just look at that. So let's go into edit mode on this model. And you know what we'll do? Let's actually go into the UV editing workspace. So up here where we switch to the shading workspace, there's another workspace, I see you've already found it, called UV editing. And now we can see, okay, well this cube, when you add a cube, it comes with a default UV unwrap. Not very helpful because we're trying to learn how to do that, so let's just ignore that for now. If I type U on the keyboard, we get this UV unwrapping menu. And if you click unwrap, what it's going to do, and you have to have your cube selected and in edit mode, and then you can click U with your mouse over it. You good? Got it? So select everything, A to select everything, and then click U. And let's keep it to a simple cube for now, because anything more complex is going to be harder to unwrap. And UV unwrapping is so complex, people make dedicated pieces of software for it. It's a huge rabbit hole that I'm only going to be touching the very surface of today. Remember, you can hit numpad 0 on the keyboard to snap to it. Sorry, numpad period, the one to the next. And then middle mouse button to pan. So go ahead and hit A to select everything, and then click U and press unwrap. And you'll notice it gives you an error. And the reason for that is because we haven't added any seams, so it doesn't have a way to unwrap that object into a 3D space. So let's go into our edge selection mode and let's start adding seams. So go ahead and select, let's just say these two edges for now, and click U and mark seam. And you'll notice they turn red. So let me try unwrapping this again and see what happens. Okay, well, it unwrapped, but now it's this tiny little line in the corner of the screen, still not helpful. So let's go ahead and mark more things as seams. Let's try marking that as a seam. Didn't fix anything. So if you've ever played, it's always a puzzle, right? And if you've ever made those little paper printouts that then you can fold up into a cube, that's exactly how this works, except the other way around. You have a cube, and you're trying to figure out how to cut it up so that it can be laid out flat like paper. So after a while, you memorize the pattern you need to do for a cube. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick on my cube. You unwrap, and apparently I didn't get it right because that's not the correct unwrapping. I missed a corner here. That's what happened. So let's go ahead and click U, mark seam on this corner, and now I'll unwrap. That didn't fix anything. Why didn't that fix anything? What have I done wrong? Ah, yes. See, UV mapping is this game of just marking edges of seams, seeing if it, there we go. I've got it to unwrap properly. So I'm going to go ahead and let's give you till 7 to play around with that and see if you can get your cube to properly unwrap.
How do I clear if I want to just start from the base?
You can, so if you have any edge selected and you do U and click clear seam, it does the opposite as mark seam. But you have to be in edit mode, obviously. Oh, actually, no, never mind, you are. So to clear everything, I would select everything, use A to select all your edges, and then just clear seam. U, clear seam.
I see that I have highlighted down here too.
Oh, you added your cube when you were in edit mode for that. So
Okay, yeah,
go ahead and here, let me just
Should I
fix this
just
for you.
Command Z?
You can delete that. Now let's add the cube when we're not in edit mode.
Alrighty. Cool. So let's think in a 3D space.
Yeah. And this is a real mind bender, figuring out what edges you need to mark as seams in order to get a proper unwrap, and the cube's just the simplest one. There's a reason people have literally been looking into using artificial intelligence to get good UV unwraps. Yeah.
Make a seam again.
How do you make a seam?
Yeah.
So you select an edge. You got to be in an edge selection mode, right?
Yeah.
So you could have all your edges selected, make them all seams, and I've actually seen people do that before, but it's not the best practice. So select a edge or the edges you want as seams.
Oh, fuck.
And you can add seams in multiple passes. You don't have to have them all done at once.
I know. I'm just like, this is driving me a little insane now. So the seam.
No, you have to have your mouse over here and then click U,
Okay. U.
mark seam.
Mark seam.
So one thing I notice you have here is that this square is going to be cut off
Yeah.
from the rest of the model.
I'm going to try and fix that.
So if you click something in U clear seam, it will,
Here, you keep talking.
if you click something and if you select it and then click U clear seam, it will get rid of the seam.
Okay.
So if you made something a seam that you didn't want to be a seam, you can make it not a seam anymore without clearing everything.
Okay. So
You have to have your mouse over that view. Whenever you hit a hotkey in Blender, it gets sent to the view that you have your mouse currently over.
Oh.
So if you want to do something in the 3D view with a hotkey, you have to have your mouse over the 3D view when you hit it. And then after you've marked your seams, you unwrap will attempt to unwrap your object.
All right.
So one approach I've seen people do for cubes is just making every single edge a seam, which can have its uses in some case. That speaker model that I showed you earlier, I actually did make every edge a seam because there was enough detail within it that it would be difficult to make it not do that. So, and then if you click U and unwrap,
Oh. Unwrap, please work, please. Sweet.
there we go, there's your UV map. And actually, one of the reasons people do that for cubes commonly is because you can actually fill up the texture space more efficiently if you're not bound together. Mm-hmm. For instance, if you look at mine, you can see that I've got about 4 squares down the side. You've got about 3 squares in the same space. So that's actually a more efficient unwrap than I did.
Okay.
So
Sweet.
that's pretty good. Ultimately, the goal when it comes to ultimately the goal when it comes to making your UV maps is you want to try to make as efficient use of the square that you're given for your texture as possible. And that's why your UV map, and let me do a quick unwrap in the style that you did. So this is similar to what you had. And this is actually a more efficient unwrap. And yeah, that's what you have, nice. This is a more efficient unwrap than what I had done, which is this, although this demonstrates how unwraps work a little better, because it's occupying more of the image than this is. So you want your image to be as full as possible. So that if, for instance, because your image file that you're going to plug into it has only a limited resolution, you want as much of that resolution to go into texturing parts of your model as possible. So for instance, with this, I actually took that approach. I made every single edge here part of the, I made that a seam, and then I just put each edge in separately, each face in of the speaker on a separate part of the image so that then I could best arrange them. And then I also did some tricks like shoving some detail inside the hole down here. I had an add-on which helps me do that, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this class. So now that we know how to do a proper UV map, you ready to learn how to cheat?
Yes.
So in the case of our backrooms thing, we're not trying to apply one whole texture to, we're not trying to apply what's known as a non-overlapping texture to the model. A non-overlapping texture allows you to do texture painting on specific parts of the model and not be worried that that piece of texture space is going to be shared by another part of the model. Now, if you just want to repeat a texture across the entire model like we want to do, what you can do, you type U, make sure you select everything first, type U, and then cube.
Looking at presentation.
What?
Presentation is what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh wait, shit. There we go. You're going to want to type U and cube projection. And then if you click this button down here, you can change cube size. And this is what this is doing, is it essentially, instead of trying to do a smart unwrap, it just projects the texture from the point of view of a cube, essentially. And if you use any kind of like ArcViz software, this is the default of what it does. Basically what it does is it projects the texture onto the model without any regard of how it's overlapping any other part of the model. So now, and I'm just gonna quickly undo all of this. You don't have to follow this part. I'm gonna quickly go into texture painting mode just to demonstrate something here. So I'm gonna go way too fast. You're not gonna be able to follow me here. But so now I'm texture painting and I've got this nice unwrap here. And as you can see, when I paint on the texture, it's only painting on one side of the texture, and this is what's actually happening inside. But if I were to go into UV mapping and I do cube projection, it's a lot easier, but now watch what happens when I try to paint on part of the texture. It's painting on multiple faces because all of these share this one spot in UV space. Luckily, we're just trying to repeat the backroom's wall texture across the entire model without any regard for like texture painting or stuff. So that's what we're going to do. So go ahead and you can delete your cube if you want. Go and select your wall model, your walls. Make sure you're in object mode to select it. Then let's go back into the UV editing workspace. And actually, let's go, okay, so yeah, you can see the problem, what it did. So go back into the UV editing workspace. And let me get rid of this awful texture. And let's go into shader view so we can actually see what it's doing with the texture, right? Now, let's go into edit mode, select everything with A. And then we'll use cube projection on this. And it's created something that looks awful. And the reason for this is because we haven't applied our scale. So remember when we were first making this model, what we did was we created a cube and then we scaled it up, right? The problem with that approach is that it essentially, the scale is non-destructive, which means all it's doing is it's taking that base mesh and then applying a transform for it. If I were to Alt-S, undo my scale, all of a sudden we've got this monstrosity. So, let me undo that. What we're going to do is we're going to right-click on the mesh. Wait, actually, I'm used to doing this really fast. I don't actually I know it's in my muscle memory. No, it's... Yeah, okay, there we go. We're going to click the mesh, and we're going to do Control-A this time. And that's going to open up the Apply menu. And then you're going to apply our scale. And what that's done is essentially said, okay, you scaled the cube before, but now that's your basis. So if I were to do Alt-S now, it doesn't do anything. Or if I were to scale it and do Alt-S, now it goes back to that. And a lot of stuff like UV unwrapping, and I accidentally duplicated it, a lot of stuff like UV unwrapping and some modifiers will work on an unscaled version of the mesh. So now let's do our cube projection. And we can see it's a little bit more readable. So what we can do also is we can change our cube size down here and basically say, okay, in world space, this is what I want the size of the texture to be. So I say, okay, we want the texture to represent, it's 2 meters long. We set this to do, and now we've got a 2 meter long wall texture, and I actually quite like this, so I'm going to leave this. And now our walls are textured, and I'm going to go around and help people because it looks like people need a lot of help. Yeah. All right, I'll start with you, David, I guess. All right, cool. So, what has happened here?
I don't know.
Are you doing a U cube projection?
Yes, I'm trying to. Here, let's...
U cube projection. No, you didn't hit cube projection. You were hitting something else. But make sure you do Control A. So here, let me take this.
All right.
Go ahead and hit Control A.
Control A.
And hit apply your scale first. Scale.
Scale.
There we go. And now I go back into edit mode.
All right.
And hit U, cube projection. And now down under cube projection, you decide in world units, how big do you want your texture to be? I set mine to 2. I find that was fairly good.
But I can kind of look.
You can visualize what it's doing, but that's also a mathematical approach. Say you had a texture that was like road tiles or like sidewalk tiles, and you knew each sidewalk tile was supposed to be 1 meter long, and the texture contained 2 sidewalk tiles in it, then you would set that to 2, make the texture 2 meters long. Now each of your sidewalk tiles is 1 meter long.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Anyone else need help?
There we go. Selected it all.
I'm gonna hit U, cube projection.
Oh, cube projection, cube projection. Ah, there we go.
Nice. And now, again, so your cube size, that's how big your texture is in world space. So I set mine to 2.
Okay, so 2. Okay.
There we go. And wait, what scale did you model your thing to? Because that doesn't look like.
I was trying to follow your scales mostly, so.
Can I see how tall this is?
Yeah, sure.
This is gonna be. Okay, yeah, no, that's the right scale. I'm not sure what happened here. Did you control A?
Yeah,
Scale. U, cube projection. Let's set this to 2. Huh. That's odd. Maybe let's go 1 for you. Oh, okay, yours is 2 meters tall. I set mine to 3 meters tall. That's why. Okay, that's fine though. Yeah, if I look at mine, yeah, it's 2.5 meters tall. Okay, it's no biggie.
Oh, actually maybe.
Oh, you got to do that right after you do the projection. So U, cube projection, when you're in edit mode. You got to select everything first. So hit A, U, cube projection. And now you should be able to set your cube size.
Oh. What size did you set it to?
I set it to 2. But you can play around with it, find a scale that works well for you. And basically, if you didn't overhear me talking to David about this, what that means is that, say you had a texture that represented, and in the texture was just 1 concrete tile, then you set that to 2, your concrete tile is going to be 2 meters long. So this isn't a concrete tile, so it's a little harder to tell.
Okay, now I get it.
Yeah, so you set that to whatever scale you want. All right. So how's everyone feeling about that?
A little confused, but getting it.
Yeah. So basically the cube projection, what it does is it's an automatic way of generating your UV maps. And it's not the only way by far, but it's the easiest and most efficient way to generate UV maps like this. It does not generate UV maps that are appropriate for use for texture painting. But if you're just trying to repeat a texture across a wall like this, it's a perfectly valid way to do your UV maps.
Quick question.
Yes.
What does UV stand for?
It doesn't actually, UV does not stand for anything. Basically, what it means is, so it comes from the technical term of it. So you've got your X, Y, and Z coordinate space, right? And when you graphics programmers were initially coming up with UV maps, they needed a way to represent their texture space without getting confused with the 3D space. So instead of using X and Y, they're using U and V.
Okay.
That's why they're called UV maps.
Thank you.
So I'll let you guys get accustomed to that and maybe keep playing around with the scale until 7.14, should we say? And then let's move on to setting up the other parts of the texture. And yeah, if you select one face and then do the U-cube projection again, you can project it separately on that face. So, oh, you're trying to get back to face mode? Oh, nice. And you can actually move it around in the UV editor as well. Oh yeah, here's a thing I forgot to cover, and it's not completely necessary to know for this class, but something you can do in Blender, is if you'll notice your cube projection created a whole bunch of faces over here. Each of these faces corresponds to one face in the scene, and if you select them and move them around, I'm not sure which one this is. Okay, yeah, it looks like it's that one over here. You can actually move around the texture on the face in the scene.
Match it up exactly how you want it.
Yeah, so if say, okay, well the corner should really be on one of these seams, I could do that, and now the corner's on this seam. Or if you select a face here, it'll be the only face that shows up here so you don't get congested. And okay, well I'm going to move this a little bit, make the corner line up there. So don't need to do that. And doing that without selecting everything can actually lead to situations like this where it's like, what the hell is this supposed to be? So I'm just going to undo that for myself because all right, let's move on to the rest of texturing, because right now we've just got our color, right? But remember, we also still have our roughness and our metalness maps to do. So this wall doesn't have any metal in it, so we're not actually going to have a metalness map. But we're still going to have a roughness map. So go ahead and select your walls and head back into the shading workspace. And you should be back in object mode now. Yeah, make sure you're in material preview, and let's go ahead and expand the node editor again down here. So right now we only have one thing connected to our main node, and this is our color. But we can add another thing. So let's go ahead and Shift A, texture, and get another image texture. And this time we are going to open our roughness map. And here's a really important step that it's really easy to miss, but it's going to look completely wrong if you do miss it. For anything that's not the base color, make sure you change this color space down here on the texture to non-color data. And what that means, it's not going to perform any of the fancy color space manipulation that has to be performed when you load a color file. Color space, and you're going to set that to non-color, right? And now we can connect this to our roughness map, to our roughness channel. And this wall doesn't have any particularly interesting roughness traits. But if you were to look at it from the side now, we can see that we actually have some roughness and some proper specular highlights on this wall. So finally is the normal map. And it's a little bit difficult to describe normal maps, so I've gone ahead and provided another slide for them. Here we've got two instances of the same wall texture. And this is just a brick texture that I got off the internet, both applied to a plane that's rotated slightly from the camera. But one of them looks like a wall of bricks, and one of them looks like an image of a wall of bricks painted on a piece of paper and then rotated. And the reason for that is because this one has a normal map, while this one does not. What is a normal map? Well, if you've been playing around with the textures, you might have already found it. It's this thing. And there's a whole bunch of complicated math that goes into what actually defines this texture that I'm not going to get into right now. But what it does is it emulates the detail on the texture. So if I go back to here, you'll notice that the bricks have a whole bunch of extra detail that's not present in the geometry. That detail is represented in the normal map, and it allows the lighting to properly interact with this fake detail that's only part of the texture. When you were looking at my image earlier, David, and you were asking about those like little micro details, that was a normal map doing that. So that is the three fundamental maps of PBR. We've got our color, or albedo as it's sometimes called. We've got our roughness, and we've got our normal map. And then sometimes we'll have a metalness map as well, but that's not in most materials. So let's go ahead and add a normal map to our scene. So let's go ahead and, again, we'll add a texture, and it will be an image texture. And we'll hit open, and this time we will open the normal texture. Backrooms wall 1 underscore normal. And make sure to set it to non-color data. And what do you think it is we do next?
Attach it to normal.
Almost. And that was kind of a trick question because that's what I was expecting you to say. No, it's just normal. But actually, it's none of them. That was a trick question. It does this when you attach it straight to normal. Not right. So, unlike the other maps, I'm not entirely sure why Blender does this. You actually need a node in between. So we're going to Shift A again. And this time, we're going to, I'm actually not sure which category this is because I always search for it. Is it converter? No, it's going to be under, okay. Shift A and then vector, and then normal map. So this one right here. And then you're going to plug the output of this texture into the color input of this node. And then you're going to plug the output of this node into the normal input of your main node. And now, if you did it properly, you'll notice that your wall looks like it has a little bit of bump to it.
It's subtle, but you can
Yeah,
tell.
I probably should have chosen a texture that has a more defined normal map. A lot of the times the normal map will be subtle, but it is very important. And you, oh nice.
I just wanted to see.
You can also mess with the strength slider on the normal map node and just bump it way up if you want to see the actual effect of the normal map more.
It's like spackle. Yeah. That's cool.
Generally, I try to leave this at 1 because then it keeps it true to what the texture artist intended. Unless you're purposefully like disobeying what the texture artist intended and doing your own thing, which I guess I won't take offense. And that is the basis of a PBR texture. So where do you get these textures? Because obviously I provided these right now, but there's plenty of places that you could get them, more than just bugging me down for a PBR texture every time you want to use it. These are some of them. Most of these are free. One of these resources is paid. So you might want to take a picture of this or something. Got ambient CG, Polyhaven 3D textures. Those will give you free, a bunch of free PBR textures. And then Texture Ninja, they just have one image textures. They don't have the whole normal and roughness maps, but you can fake it sometimes with those. And then textures.com is a paid resource, but it has a whole bunch of textures as well. And then there's a spreadsheet that I unfortunately cannot take credit for making that has a whole bunch of more free texture resources. So there's a lot of them out there because once you know how to do them, it's really fast to make more of them. So I'll give you time enough to write these down if you want to explore them a little bit. So let's make use of one of those. I want you each to go on these websites and locate a carpet texture that we can use for the floor. And I'm going to do it myself, but I'm not going to show you me doing it because I want you to find it yourself. I'm not Texture Ninja. Texture Ninja doesn't have PBR textures. It's ambient CG 3D textures or ambient CG 3D textures or Polyhaven are your three sort of #1 go-tos for PBR textures. And then there's some more on the spreadsheet that I have. So go ahead and choose a carpet texture. can't do the ones that have the little substance painter on the bottom. Those don't work with Blender.
Doesn't matter what size we get?
You probably want to go for 4K. That's my go-to. My go-to is 4K JPEGs. Just because, you know, don't want to. I used to use 4K PNG, but then it started slowing down my scene significantly, and I had these massive texture files. So because you're not like doing scientific work on them, you're probably fine using a JPEG. And yes, at this point, going back, Jabril has the right idea here. Going back to look at the reference is very important when choosing your textures. Did you just try to airdrop something to the phone that I'm using to film?
Oh, sorry.
I've got it open and I've got a 3dtextures.me.
I was trying to just airdrop it to the computer.
Be careful of the ads on some of these websites. I mean, they have to fund themselves, obviously, but.
Okay, so what I want to do is select the plane. Yeah.
And don't put them into the scene yet. I'm going to show you a shortcut
Okay.
for doing that in a second. Back rooms, not back door.
Yeah, I know. I'm fixing that. Right now.
So yeah, I would take some time outside of class to get accustomed to these texture sets, because you'll come to know pretty soon that the different websites have different strengths and different weaknesses. For instance, ambient CG has a whole lot of procedural textures. So I can be assured that if I find a texture, there will be 5 other textures that are based on the same code that are going to look similar but different to it. Or I could even get the source file and play with it myself. Polyhaven, on the other hand, has a lot of photo textures. So what they do generally is they take pictures and then they use a bunch of Photoshop magic to turn those into textures. 3dtextures, on the other hand, has a bunch of very artistic textures. So if you're looking for a like a science fiction wall backdrop, 3dtextures is the way to go. But they're going to be a little bit lacking when you want just a base texture that you can then edit. So, and then Texture Ninja, they don't have PBR textures, but if you're just like making a backdrop, for instance, and you don't want to, you're making an interior scene, but then you need a texture for what's out the window, they're the place to go. So yeah, get used to these type of resources, because, oh, and then one more thing, make sure that the textures are in OpenGL format. There's 2 different, and it's kind of stupid that this is the case, but there are 2 different normal map formats. There's OpenGL normals and there's DirectX normals. Blender uses OpenGL normals. Other pieces of software like Unreal Engine use DirectX normals. They're very similar, they just have the red channel flipped. No, sorry, the green channel flipped. So switching between the 2 formats is trivial. You just take it into Photoshop, open up a curves, set it to only green, and flip it around. But it's annoying if you don't know what you're looking for, and then your normal maps look wrong.
It's like an extra step that you gotta do.
Yeah, and most websites will provide both DirectX and OpenGL normals. Just make sure you're getting the right one. OpenGL, just in case you missed that. That's the format Blender uses. All right. I'm going to go ahead and find my textures now. I just realized I think I'm going to use that one, actually. That's the one I used when practicing. So good find.
Will you change from presentation mode to what you're looking at?
I put it in presentation mode on purpose so you couldn't copy off of me.
Wow.
But now that you've all had a good chance to look around, I guess I will reveal which ones I'm using. This is the texture I'm going to use for my floor. That's the same one you have. So let me go ahead and download that. And again, it's downloading a zip. Don't fall into the trap David did where you just put the zip in your textures folder. You have to extract it. And this is why we made a folder within our textures folder for that. And I'm going to do it again, where this is carpet 11. Let me make a new folder within our textures folder. I'm going to call it carpet 011. There we go. And then we're going to take our color, our roughness, and our normal, and the GL version of the normal, and we're going to drag it in to that folder we made. You don't technically have to make a subfolder, but if you've got a big scene, then all of a sudden you've got 50 different JPEG files sitting around in your textures folder, and it's hard to sift through them. So it's good practice to make subfolders. Hell, if you really wanted, you could throw them into your root project folder, but like every time I've seen someone do that, it's just a nightmare. Does everyone have their textures downloaded and in their textures folder? Great. I'm going to show you a shortcut for getting the PBR textures set up. Because now that we've done this, you don't want to have to drag them into here, add image texture nodes, connect them all up to your thing every single time, right? So, going to go to File, sorry, no, Edit. You're going to go to Edit, Preferences. And then we're going to go to Add-ons. You might already be on Add-ons if you're not. And then we're going to look for Node Wrangler.
For node what?
Node Wrangler. I already have it turned on because I've used Blender on this computer before, but it's off by default. Go ahead and click the check mark next to it to enable the Node Wrangler. You can search in the upper right-hand corner, by the way.
Yeah, mine was enabled.
Oh, yep, no, I've used Blender on that computer before too, so I probably turned it on then. So enable Node Wrangler. Then you can go ahead and close out of that. So let's select our floor. And let's go ahead and make a new material. You can also make a new material by pressing that button. So now we've got this again. So we can select our principled node again, which you seem to be missing. Did you click new material? Did you click? There we go. What have you done? Shading, yeah. What were you in?
UV.
Oh yeah. We don't really use that unless we're actually doing UV editing, or sometimes texture manipulation. So we've got our principled, and we're going to type Control-Shift-T, or I think it's Command-Shift-T on Mac. And it's going to pull up that menu. Or maybe try Control-Shift-T. I'm not sure if the Node Wrangler developer adapted it for Mac properly.
I'm not saying it happened.
Let me see. So we select this, Control-Shift-T.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Quick update. If you're on Mac, it's still Control-Shift-T. Even though that's not the standard, it looks like the developer for this add-on didn't properly adapt it to Mac and make a command. You have to have your principled node selected.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
So now it's going to open up a menu. And what we're going to do is we're going to open our textures folder. We're going to find the carpet 001 or 011 or whatever texture you downloaded. Then we're going to select our normal, our color, and our roughness maps.
And that's normal DX?
Normal GL.
GL.
Normal GL, the color and roughness, and then click Principled Texture Setup down at the bottom. And what that's going to do is it's going to automatically set up all the node groups and stuff that we had done manually before with those textures. I don't think that was, you did that right.
Yeah, me.
So go ahead and hit Control Z.
Control Z.
Control Shift T again.
Control Shift T.
Yeah, you're gonna want your roughness, normal GL, and color.
Color. Oh, color. There. I like it. Yeah, free.
Control, not Shift.
Control. There we go. And
it's gonna look really big for now. That's okay. So now to fix that, because we have to set up our UV mapping on this ground plane. So go ahead and select, go back to your UV editing workflow and make sure you're in edit mode, select it. And let's just do the unwrap again. So we'll just do U, cube projection, just like we did for the walls. And set our size to, I think I'm gonna do 2 again. And now we have our floor. Actually, I think for my particular texture, it's gonna work better with 4. Yeah, no, I'm gonna, actually wait. I'm gonna use 1, I think. Actually, what should I use? I don't know what I should use. Yeah. I mean, it's very low key. You can walk through the camera view. It doesn't matter. I'm not actually sure what's live. I'm gonna use 1 for my cube size right now. Oh, and make sure you do Control A and a scale on the ground plane as well. Yeah, to apply your scale of the ground plane. Yeah. Sorry, Command A. Oh, you have to not be in edit mode. You have to be in object mode.
Object mode.
And quick reminder, tab is an easy way to swap between edit mode and object mode. So Command A.
Okay, Command A.
Scale.
Scale.
There we go. So that applied your scale, and now we can do the box unwrap, the box project thing that we did before. So hit, you got to be in edit mode, so now hit tab to go back into edit mode. And now you got to select everything, so A first. And now you can do your U and cube projection. And then set your cube size to whatever you want. So I set mine to 1 for my texture. I'm not sure what you want it as. How are you doing? Ooh, that's a fancy carpet texture.
Thank you. I got.
So you're going to apply your scale. Now go into edit mode. And then you're going to do your box projection again. So you box project or cube project. And then you're going to set your size.
That's what I keep on forgetting to do.
That texture to me looks like it belongs a little bigger.
A little bigger?
Yeah, I would set that to 2 maybe for you. Not 20, 2. Nice. All right.
I'm going to change my color of my carpet.
All right, so I'm actually going to go over that next.
Okay, cool. I'll stand by.
So yeah, I believe, where did you get this from?
The first one on there.
Ambient CG?
Yeah.
Ambient CG has different variants. So you can get one that looks exactly like that, but a different color. That's what I was talking about, ambient CG being procedural. They make different variants of everything.
Okay.
But I guess as a demonstration, we can keep this now. So let's talk about how to modify these textures, because sometimes they're not going to be exactly the way you want. But the beauty of a node system is that even if they're not exactly the way you want out of the box, you can modify them to be exactly the way you want. So remember how we've got this node and it's applying the texture to this node, which is our receiving the texture. We can put anything we want in the middle. So let's go ahead and Shift A again. And this time we'll go to color. And we've got a hue saturation node. We click, when we're placing it, we can click it on this to put it in the middle. And you're going to want to put it in the middle of your color node if you want to change the color. So yeah, right there, David. And now you've got a nice hue saturation value slider that you can start playing with. And if anyone's done color correction in Premiere, you know how to use this. If not, you can Google it, I guess. So I personally, I'm going to make this a little bit less saturated, and I'm going to adjust my hue. By the way, when you're adjusting one of these, sliders, if you hold down Shift, you can get fine adjustments. So if you're, say, at 5, but you want to be adjusting, you don't want to accidentally go all the way down to here, you can hold down Shift, and now I'm adjusting really easily between like 4.5 and 5. So I think I'm going to swap out my texture because I don't like this as much as yours. What texture was that?
It was like the Fabric 25 4K color.
Fabric 25. That's 27. Because I think that actually, even though it doesn't quite match the original as much, I think it fits the aesthetic a lot better. So I'm gonna use this one. And this happens a lot. Oftentimes you'll put a texture in and then decide you don't like it, and then go and swap it out for a different texture. That's the only way you can know if it's going to work in your scene, ultimately. I mean, the more you do this, the more you can get an eye for what you think is going to work. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you just got to put it in and see how it looks. So let's make a new folder, Fabric. I can't see very well on this monitor. Fabric 025. We'll get this. And then I have it open here in 7-zip. Let's get our roughness, our normal GL, and our color. Bring that into here. And I'm going to get rid of all the nodes that are past that point. So we just get this again. Control-Shift-T. Fabric 025, select these. And there we go. Yes, this looks a lot better. So that's basically it for texturing. You can experiment with the different nodes, see what there is. I know there's a curves node, so you can apply an RGB curves effect to your image. And it doesn't just have to be applied to the color. So if I say take my roughness, I could make a, if I find it, where is it? I'll just search for it. I can get, where is my levels? Is it not called levels? Whatever. I can take, say, a color ramp and apply it to my roughness, and then start playing around with what the roughness value. So maybe I want this to be a lot less rough, but I still want the detail there. I could start doing this, and that, now if I get a good angle on it, we can see that it's affecting my roughness while not losing all the detail provided by the map.
Yeah,
So
I
I'm,
see the wall got shiny.
so, let's go till, I don't know, 7:48. Just play around with the node editor. Figure out, okay, well, what can you do from a node's perspective? Browse the add menu, see what all the different types of nodes there are, and just modify the materials to your liking. Yes, Jabril.
You got a color wheel?
What?
Was it that you changed the roughness value?
The roughness? I was using a color ramp.
Color.
It's not under there. I don't know why. I just searched for it. You gotta, oh. Sorry.
That's not good.
You gotta click it, and then you can search.
there.
Weird.
And if you've used any other piece of software that has a color ramp like this, like Photoshop, I know has one. So now you've made it all the way rough. So yeah, you could crush the blacks. What's actually probably better to do, instead of crushing the blacks, is to change the value of the white. So you click the white again, click that one, and then you can click on here, on the big white strip down there. You can actually change that color that's going to change to. Generally, I try to only adjust the colors of the top and bottom one and leave the actual sliders where they are so that we don't lose detail at the bottom or the top.
Okay.
And have you used Photoshop much before?
Yes.
Okay, so you should know how color ramps work then, right?
But just, I found it interesting how you used it to like.
Oh yeah, because
Change the
here, take a look at this. If I preview the roughness value, we can actually look at the image that's being output into the roughness map, right? But if I move over to the color ramp, we can see that that image can be modified just like any other image. So now I can start playing around with it like this. And now, of course, darker is going to be a lot rougher. And I preview this again, we can see, or dark is going to be a lot less rough, we can see that we can now get reflections. And something, it put a displacement map in for you. I don't usually cover displacements here, so I'm going to just get rid of that for you. This should look a lot better.
I'm gonna hit the head real quick.
Yeah. And this is the type of stuff that I can teach you as much as I could with it, but ultimately you're only going to get good at knowing how the node tree works and knowing how to work with it by practicing. And by messing around with it and seeing, hey, what does this node do? I'll try putting it here. What if I enter this value here? What is it going to do? That's the only way you can truly get good at this. That's fine. How tight did you frame it? Oh, of course, the sling is bugging out. Show it to David.
For our viewers at home, can you go over the most important nodes that they should pay attention to, or did you already?
It's impossible to judge what nodes are more important than others. It's very situational. There's the nodes you use more often, but every node serves its own purpose. It's like saying what piece of equipment is most important on a film set. Well, yeah, you're going to be using the camera most, but that doesn't mean that the lights are any less important. So. All right, so the next topic is completely different to texturing, so take as much time as you want on figuring out the textures, because then we're going to do a complete 180 and start talking about something else. And then just other general things you should keep track of when dealing with the principled shader. Don't touch the specular slider. Don't touch the specular tint slider. That's basically it. Don't touch specular and don't touch specular tint. That's for more advanced users who know, because it's not physically accurate if you do that. There's no way that a real material could have something like that happen. So,
This is kind of cool, putting a spherical.
what is that?
roughness. So the carpet roughness, I was playing around with this here.
Oh, the mapping. Nice.
Mapping, yeah. So I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool effect.
Yeah.
Probably only very useful, useful in only a very small amount of.
Yeah. Generally, if you wanted to look like that, you'd just make another texture
Yeah.
that looks like that.
Change that back to flat. Come back. It's not froze. Nice. Yeah, this sometimes does that.
Yes, the metal carpet looks great. Oh, now it's just wet.
Yeah, I'm trying to get this out.
How to fix it?
Yeah, I'm trying to make it less wet and more dry and depressing looking.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, there we go. That does it.
Okay.
And actually turning down the roughness on things like that is a really good method of making things look wet. On carpet, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because that's not how carpet wettens, but if you have like a concrete texture and then you did that to it, it would make the concrete look wet, which is actually something I used in the picture I showed yesterday with like the Chinese street and it was raining. I did that on basically all the textures to make them all look wet. So. All right, how are we feeling? We ready to move on?
Yes.
All right, so quick thing I wanted to cover before we move on to the next topic that I kind of forgot about before. So these walls are technically not right yet, and there's this concept that is actually very important when it comes to making photoreal scenes, and that is that there is no such thing as a perfectly sharp edge in real life. You got corners, yes, but even if you look at, say, the corner of the windowsill up there, you'll notice that there is a slight bevel to it that makes it reflect a tiny bit of light off of the corner. So unless you have like a knife, there's no such thing as a perfectly sharp edge, and we need to replicate that. So the way to do that, and there's multiple ways to do it, but here's the way I like to do it that I find the most reliable, is we go into object mode, and we add what's called a modifier. So a modifier is basically a script which gets applied to the geometry in a non-destructive manner. So every time the geometry tessellates, which means it gets prepared to render, First it evaluates what you actually modeled, and then it runs through all the modifiers that you may have applied. So go ahead and click the little wrench icon here in the Properties panel. And then,
Select our walls, right?
yeah, select the walls, and then click the wrench icon. Then click Add Modifier, and we're going to add a bevel modifier. So that's going to be right here.
Generate.
Yeah, under Generate Bevel. And that hasn't done anything. Why has that not done anything for any of us? This is the type of stuff that you run into. Okay, so I figured out why, at least for me. So, side tangent, sometimes what happens when you're modeling is if you make a mistake of some sort, you end up with two vertices in the exact same place, which is generally not allowed. So to fix that, you're going to go into edit mode, select everything, and then you're going to go to Mesh, Clean Up, Merge by Distance.
Okay, so A to select everything.
In edit mode. You're not in edit mode right now.
Edit, A, mesh, clean up, merge by distance.
Yeah. So that's why your bevel's not working.
Oh.
Because you need to go to edit mode, and then clean up, mesh, clean up, merge by distance. You're in object mode right now.
Okay.
And what that's going to do is it's basically going to take all the vertices that are sharing a position, which they shouldn't be, and they're just going to make them into one vertice. So once you do that, you should notice if you go back to your bevel modifier and start playing with it, it's properly beveling your edges. And this is done in a non-destructive manner. So let's say if I were to, and you don't need to copy me here, go back and let's say I add a loop cut. Nope, that's not how you add a loop cut. I go back and I add a loop cut, and then maybe I extrude this out a little bit. You'll notice that the beveling stays there, but it doesn't actually interfere with my modeling. Yeah. Well, that's because I haven't UV unwrapped this face.
Okay.
So if I were to actually want to do this, I'd have to go back and I'd have to UV unwrap again because I've added new geometry.
So is it a good idea whenever you're doing the UV unwrapping to do that at the end step?
You always want to do your UV unwrapping after you finish modeling.
Okay.
If you change the model after you UV unwrap, not only do you oftentimes have to UV unwrap, but depending on if you've painted textures, now you have to repaint the textures. So it's a real pain to change the model after your UVs are done. So you want to make sure your model is finished before you do your UV unwrapping.
Because of
What happened?
The carpet, I mean, the wall.
Yeah, no, that's messed up UVs.
Yeah.
So just do the box projection again. So go to edit mode, A, U, box, cube projection, and then set your size to what you want it to be. I set it to 2. So these bevels, right now they're artistic bevels. They're like rounding the corners of the wall. We don't want to do that. We're just trying to add realism. So let's turn our amount way down to like this much, to like 0.007 or something like that.
For the amount?
For the amount. Because we're not trying to actually make the walls look beveled, we're just trying to add the proper glint that you would get off the corner. But something's still not right. And the problem is you can see still that it's a very sharp bevel. So now we're going to go down to shading, and we're going to click harden normals. And it's going to complain about needing to enable auto smooth in object properties data. So then we're going to go down to this little triangle thing, which is the object data properties. And we're going to do what it said. We're going to go to normals and auto smooth. And now you'll see our wall looks almost the same way it does before, but if we hit it at the right angle, we can see that it's catching a little bit of the light, like an actual wall would on the corner. Is this making sense to everyone?
I lost you at the last step. You did that one more time.
Oh yeah, so after you click harden normals, you're going to come over to object data properties down here, the little triangle, and then under normals, you're going to click auto smooth.
Thank you.
All right, has everyone got that? Ben, you had a question?
Yeah, so I noticed when you extended the bevels for the texture got distorted.
Oh yeah, no, I explained that already. Basically, that wasn't me extending bevels, that was me adding new geometry. I was trying to illustrate how adding new geometry modifiers will properly update. But the thing is, UVs don't update, and I didn't UV unwrap the, you weren't here when we covered UV unwrapping, but I didn't UV unwrap those faces, so of course they didn't look right. All right, so should we move on to asset creation?
Yeah.
Or asset installation? Say we wanted, I don't know, like a flower pot, or some, like a desk or a drawer or something in here that we didn't want to make from scratch. Well, just like there are libraries where you can get models, or sorry, textures, there are libraries where you can get models. And there aren't as many because it's not as easy to make models as it is to make textures. But here are a few of them. So there's Polyhaven, which is the same website where you got some of the textures, and the person who runs that also makes models. And then there's Sketchfab, which has a bunch of high-end 3D models that you can download. And some of them are paid. Actually, Sketchfab's a very big, Sketchfab aims to be YouTube for 3D modeling. So there's some models that you can't download at all. There's some models that you have to pay to download, and then there's some models that are available for free. Though there's a lot that are available for free. I also have a Sketchfab page, so you can check that out if you want.
Paid or free?
Free. And then there's Blend Swap, which has a lot of free models. But unfortunately, they're also pretty bad a lot of the time because they're where amateurs who just learned how to model things in Blender go to post their work. So, yeah, I generally don't usually expect to find something really good on Blend Swap. But let's all go on to, actually I just realized you need an account to download things from Sketchfab. I forgot about that part. Let's go on to Polyhaven then. And everyone try to find a model which is going to be put into your scene. Oh, wait, what? I think they added that today. That was not there before. The carrot cake. Yeah.
Can you show that website on the screen?
Yeah. Give me a second. So this is Polyhaven. We were laughing about this carrot cake, which is just front and center. I guess you can put the carrot cake in if you want. I don't think that's what I'm going to put in. I'm actually going to cut away so that you don't see what I choose. Because ha ha ha, I want you to choose your own. And Polyhaven's all done by one person, so it's a much smaller repo than Sketchfab. Sketchfab, you're going to find a lot of stuff that you won't necessarily find on Polyhaven. Oh, here's the camera, by the way, that I used yesterday when I was demonstrating the that stuff. So. All right. And don't download the model yet, just choose it.
Oh, whoops.
What?
I already downloaded it.
Okay. Well, you're probably going to need to download it again because we're going to choose a different format to download. All right. I had chosen one, but then you stole it, so I need to find another one now.
Stole what? The chest?
That's the model I was going to use. But, okay, I found something else now.
Well, I was searching for a ray gun, but they didn't have any of those.
Yeah. Sketchfab is most likely to have those if you want to make an account for that, and then you can download stuff like a ray gun. I made a portal gun on Sketchfab. It's available to download. All right. Everyone have their models chosen? All right. So here's the model that I'm going to use. It's this barrel. It's basically just a sister to the chest. And let's do the harder option first, because Polyhaven actually provides all their models in blend files, but that won't be the case for everything. Most of the time, though, you will find it as a GLTF file. So let's go ahead and download the GLTF from Polyhaven, just so that we can practice importing them.
And what does the GLT look like?
Well, the one that I'm using is this barrel, but
Will it matter if I do 8K rather than 4K or not really?
so that's the resolution of the textures that you're going to get. If you're doing, I recommend 4K usually. If you're doing like an extreme close-up shot, then 8K maybe is warranted, but generally that's just going to be a waste of system resources. And video memory is actually a major resource that gets contested over when you're making a scene like this. I've run out of video memory before. It's not fun. So we've got our...
What are the other formats you can download?
So Sketchfab offers blend files, GLTF files, and FBX files, as well as I'm not sure what's in the zip files. I think zip just allows you to download a combination. So you can get FBX files, which is an older standard, but materials don't like it so much. You can get GLTF files, and you can get blend files. So let's go ahead and open up our zip file that we got, and you'll see it gives us these. So we've got our GLTF file, and we've got a textures folder. So instead of dumping it into here, let's go ahead and create an assets folder within our project folder. And then within that, I'll go ahead and create a folder and name it whatever the name of the asset is. So wine barrel 01 in my case. And then within there, let's go ahead and take all 3 textures and put them in there. If you're missing any of these, it's not going to work. I'm running some water real quick. Be right back. I don't know if it's...
Thanks for being the stream tech, Ben.
Thank you, David.
I said thank you. Alright, so Jabril, please tell me you have all the Comic-Con stuff. So, everyone got that?
All the footage?
Yes.
All of
Alright.
it's actually on there, under Grill, under Crunchyroll.
Great.
Because we went down on that part.
So
Yeah, I'll take it.
now let's go back into Blender. And whoa, I have way too many windows open on my computer. Let me close that. This can happen sometimes. You just get so many windows open. So let's go back into Blender. Did I close it? I didn't close it, did I? No, I didn't. Okay. And then remember the 3D cursor?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and open the 3D cursor tool and click wherever we want this asset to be spawned. So I'm going to put it maybe in the corner here.
So that's S, right?
No, you just got to click it on the side, the 3D cursor tool, and then just click in your scene wherever you want your asset to be spawned. Oh, and you should be back in default view, by the way, the default workspace. And then make sure to go back off of the 3D cursor tool, or else you're going to get really confused later when you try to select something and it's moving the 3D cursor around. So now we've got our 3D cursor in place. Let's go to File, Import, and then we're going to select GLTF. It's going to open up this menu where you can locate the GLTF file that you just downloaded and put in your assets folder. And you're just going to double click this. And actually, it's probably best if we uncheck pack images for now. If you didn't do that, if you forgot to do that, that's fine. And then we're going to import. and it seems to have imported over here for some reason. Okay, never mind, it doesn't import where the 3D cursor is, it just imports where the origin is. Okay, great. So let's just move that then. Move that into place. And now we've got a nice, high quality looking asset in our scene.
How's it like broken?
What?
It's just mine is split in like a different pieces.
Oh, yeah, no, a lot of them do that.
Okay.
What that means is that you can like move the lid separately, so you can have the lid open.
Oh,
Or you can like have the handles flapping around.
that's dope. So it's not broken.
And then you can select like just the lid. And
Oh, what?
but you need to make sure you're moving that on the local axis. So go ahead and change that to local before you rotate that, so that you can make sure it's staying on the hinges. Or you could do an animation of it falling off if you want, but that's nice. What have you got? Oh, you've got a nice statue.
A nice little horsey.
Nice. You've got, oh yes, that that model. I believe that is very in place. Honestly, I could totally see in a backrooms like room just finding that sitting there. Like it totally makes sense with the creepypasta. So that's one way to import things. Sometimes you will receive models in just. Sometimes you will be lucky and you'll receive models in a Blender format. Because if you go into edit mode on these, you'll notice these are not workable at all. These are all triangles. That breaks the base rule of topology. You don't want just to be triangles. But also, you'll notice that it looks like at one point these were squares. And then someone drew a triangle through them. Because that's exactly what happened. GLTF files only support triangles. So every other type of polygon has to be triangulated. Sometimes this is not desirable. That's why you'll look for other formats. So let's go ahead and you know what, let's go ahead and choose another model. So I'm gonna find, you know what, I'm gonna use that chest because I wanted to use it before. But this time we're gonna set our download format to blend. Any file that offers a Blender file format, unless it's like horribly corrupted, you generally want to go for that if you're importing into Blender. So I'm going to download the blend file. Ooh, Canon, nice. So download that, and then again, make another folder for it within your assets folder. Where you're going to put the Blender file along with the textures folder it comes with. Has everyone got that? It's a good idea to check inside the blend file you're importing to make sure that there's nothing out of the ordinary, because sometimes people will give you their working files, which is not ideal. So just open that up, the blend file you downloaded. It will, I'm not sure what it does on Mac. Well, on Windows it opens in a new instance. And just double check what's in it. So the ones on Polyhaven are good to import as whole, but generally you'll see a collection, right? and you'll see that it has all the desired models within that collection. If it doesn't have that, just make sure you make a mental note of what it does have and what of this you want to import. So now we can close out of this, don't need to save it because it's not ours. Let's do, so we want to import this, right? So we're going to do File, Append this time, because we're appending it from another blend file. And let's go and find it. It's going to be our assets. I'm using the treasure chest. And watch what happens if I open the blend file. It opens it like a folder. So now we're looking at all the stuff inside the blend file. All you need to worry about generally is collection. We're going to double click collection and we'll see we've got the collection, in my case, treasure chest. So I'm going to double click that to append it. And now it's been imported just as if I had imported it from a file. So I'm going to move this around, maybe rotate this. And if I go into edit mode on this, you'll see that now I get the nice quad topology because, oh damn, the person who modeled this, I thought that was a texture. Okay, that's just a sidetrack. I can't believe this guy actually modeled the entire edges of the test. I totally thought that was a texture. Anyway, I digress. Now we've got the nice quad topology because it's come directly from a blend file. And it's also guaranteed that the textures will work. What?
Oh, I'm trying to append this thing, it's like not showing it at all.
Oh. Let me see.
Yeah. File, append. So.
Oh, you're in the brushes. How did you get, so go up.
Okay.
Sorry, no, go up the previous folder.
Up.
That up,
Yeah.
So we're looking inside the blend file right now, right?
Right.
We want to be looking in the collections
Okay, collections.
and then get the sofa.
Perfect. All right.
And that one comes in multiple models, so. Yeah, no, that's the case for a lot of them. Like on the chest, the lid was separate, and the sofa, the chairs are separate. And that's all I have in store for you today. So if you want to stay and fiddle around with it, but I'm going to end the stream now. Yeah, thanks for coming. If you have any questions, I'm going to hang around a little, so feel free to ask. And yeah.
Thanks for teaching us.
Thanks for the lessons.
Let's give it a hand to the teacher.
Actually, about to go, just one question. When it comes to like finding certain blend, like